So today we have on board with us Ms. Tanupriya Gupta, who is the speaker for the day. She'll be speaking on the topic of an overview on the domestic arbitration. Along with her, we also have today, in association for holding today's webinar, we have Advocate Zoya Mehta, we have Advocate Lisa Taneja, and we also have Kritik Kokar, who is a law intern, and she has readily agreed to come and introduce our speaker for today.
I think
So,
I would request everyone to mute your mic. I've been muting your mic, this number 48156. I do not know who is this person. Could you please just mute it? Thank you.
yeah, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. So, yes, Kriti, you can start.
Okay. You have to unmute Kriti.
I'm so sorry. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker of the day, Ms. Tanu Singh Gupta, Advocate, Delhi High Court. Ma'am has experience of a decade on a broad range of topics, including mainstream commercial litigation and arbitration. Over the last few years, a major thrust of her practice has been in infrastructure projects and road projects. Regularly, she represents prestigious PSU, government bodies, MNC, MSME on a wide spectrum of matters before various courts, forums, which include Supreme Court, Delhi High Court, and other high court, several tribunals and commission also, and have argued several landmark and crucial related judgments. So today, ma'am will be giving us an overview on domestic arbitration. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Kriti, for such a lovely introduction. Firstly, I would personally congratulate Mr. Nitish Mehra for conducting this series of rather successful and educational webinars. Now, the topic of today's webinar is an overview of domestic arbitration. So the moment I say overview, what I'll be trying to do is I'll just take a very topical view of the domestic arbitration. Alongside, I'll try to cover few trending and critical issues. So if you're already a subject matter expert or you're very versed with the area, this might not be a lot of value addition for you. Now, I'll just take you through the journey of arbitration. First, the Arbitration Act came in the year 1899, which was, of course, based on the British law. Thereafter, it was Arbitration Act 1940. So, Arbitration Act 1940 only related to domestic arbitration. And then alongside of domestic arbitration, there were other two acts, which was based on New York Convention and Geneva Convention. So all these three acts, which is Arbitration Act 1940, Foreign Act 1961, and 1937 Act, all these three acts were repealed, and now there is a consolidated law, which is in statute, which is in force today, that is Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. Now, in order to understand that what this 1996 Act intends to do, I'll just read out the provision from United Nations International Trade Law, which says that a unified legal framework for the fair and efficient settlement of dispute arising in international commercial relations. As far as 1996 Act is concerned, it can be divided into two parts. The first part only relates to the domestic arbitration, and the second part relates to the enforcement of foreign award. Now, since our area today, what we'll be discussing is only domestic arbitration, I won't mention much into the foreign award. However, I'll just like to clarify that as far as these foreign awards are concerned, only those foreign awards are enforceable in India, which are part of the New York Convention Treaty. Having said that, what it means is that if there is a country which is non-signatory to this New York Convention Treaty, then in that case, there is another route which has to be followed. And that route is that this particular country has to get this award recognized from its court, its concerned court, and get it recognized as a foreign decree. And then this decree will be enforceable under the Civil Procedure Code and not the Arbitration Act. Now, this 1996 Act has also undergone through few major amendments. One is 2015 amendment and the other one is 2019 amendment. As far as 2015 amendment is concerned, there is a lot of, the idea behind 2015 amendment is that the timeline has to be shortened, because the idea behind arbitration was a speedier remedy. Whereas these arbitrations, they continue for years and years. Like I am personally a part of arbitration, which are ongoing arbitration for good 5 years now. So the entire idea is defeated. The moment there's arbitration, they go on. And know that, once you get an award, that's an end of the story, because thereafter, generally party, they challenge this award before a single judge and then the division bench, and then you also try your luck before the Honorable Supreme Court. So the 2015 arbitration, the idea was to set few timelines, as well as there was another intent. The intent was that since the party has already decided to opt the way of ADR, which is alternate dispute resolution, the litigation has to be lessened. So if we see the provision, the concerned provision wherein we can challenge the award, the interference by the court has been narrowed to such an extent there are only 2 to 3 provisions which finally come to your rescue, which I'll deal once I'll take up the concerned topic. Now there is this report, there's this press release by the law minister. Once I read it, the idea and the intent of 2015 amendment will be clear. It will also give you so as to the flavor of 2015 amendment, because I don't think so we'll be able to cover amendments in detail today. So I'll just read these 3 lines from the law minister press release. It says, government intended to make India a hub of domestic and international arbitration by bringing in changes in law for faster resolution commercial dispute. And hence, as far as this 2015 amendment is concerned, there are strict timelines, and then there is a very, very narrow scope of interference as far as courts are concerned. As far as 2015 amendment arbitration is concerned, so much so its effect was that the India's ranking as far as ease of doing business is concerned, it has actually stepped up. So today, although again it's not a very impressive number, but today we are at 63. So of course it has stepped up internationally, people have appreciated. But as far as ease of doing business, as far as enforcement of award is concerned, we still lag behind, and today our position is 163. I think this may take some time and it's a long road to go. Now let's come to 2019 amendments. As far as 2019 amendments are concerned, the idea was to shift the focus from ad hoc arbitration to the institutional arbitrations. So when I say ad hoc arbitration, these arbitrations are basically unregulated arbitration, wherein 2 parties decide that, all right, this will be an arbitrator who will decide a dispute. But the problem with ad hoc arbitration is there is no regimen, there is no discipline per se. So if we see 2019, that this entire one, hello? I'll just continue. I thought, there's somebody who's paying. So as far as this institutional arbitration is concerned, if you see that there is an insertion, that this one entire part 1A, which has been inserted. So there are certain designated arbitration institutes. These arbitration institutes will be accredited, and then there is this arbitration institution who will be also responsible to train advocates, arbitrators, and this arbitration institution will also be responsible and act as a depository of awards, because ultimately there have also been cases wherein no authentic record is available, and the courts are completely perplexed and they don't know what to do and how to take it forward, how to even adjudicate the matter. So that is the plight as far as arbitration is concerned, and one can see a lot of concrete steps have been taken by the legislature, and one can also see that there is a shift in paradigm now, and therefore it seems that India will be at par as far as its arbitration is concerned. Now what I'll do is I'll quickly take up the PPT which I have prepared. In my PPT I have broadlined the topics and there are subtopics. So what I've done is I have tried to divide the arbitrations into 10 basic broad lines, and then we can discuss it one by one. If somebody can just confirm that they're able to see the PPT.
Yes, we can.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the first slide of PPT, we can see this framework I have divided into 10 parts. I'll quickly read these 10 parts. First is arbitration agreement, arbitrability, arbitral tribunal, appointment of arbitrator, interplay of venue, seat in section 42, arbitral award, challenging arbitration award, recourse against arbitration award, court's interference, and enforcement of award and stay. Now, as far as arbitration agreement is concerned, The relevant provision is section 21B of the arbitration agreement, which only says that it means an agreement referred to in section 7. Now, as far as section 7 is concerned, there are certain provisions which has to be met in order to be qualified as an arbitration award, arbitration agreement. The first is that it has to be in writing. Now, as far as this arbitration agreement is concerned, it can be an entire full-fledged agreement, or it can just be a clause in the main agreement. And then if this agreement has to be signed, it has to be, if it's not signed, then it has to be exchanged between the parties. There has to be some sort of reference. So the idea is the existence of this arbitration agreement cannot be questioned or disputed. Now, there are times when one can see that if there is an arbitration agreement or clause, there are certain provisions or the part of the arbitration clause which is invalid. When I say invalid, that means this clause is not enforceable as per law. However, it's a part of the arbitration clause. Now, generally, it has been the approach of the court that in that case, they'll apply a doctrine of severability. That means they'll separate the part which is valid from the part which is invalid. However, this separated part which is valid should have the coherency, as in one has to make the proper sense of it. So if that is possible, then court will apply the doctrine of severability and will try to ensure that this arbitration clause is intact and is possible. Now, this principle I've already mentioned in my site has been discussed in detail in the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in Shin Satellite Public Company. It's a 2006 judgment. Now, as far as arbitration disputes are concerned, in fact, if we see section 7, part 1, in part 1 itself, it says that a party are free to submit all the disputes or the selective disputes. So I can't compel you, if suppose there is an arbitration clause, I can't compel you that all the dispute needs to go to the arbitration, provided if I already identified what all disputes will go to the arbitration. Now the problem is, the moment you have the selective dispute, there are times when many of the facts are intertwined or they are so interlinked, it is very difficult for anyone to identify that what all disputes are arbitrable and non-arbitrable. Therefore, it is my personal suggestion that as far as this selective reference to arbitration is concerned, it is best avoided. Another doctrine when it comes to arbitration agreement, which is very well recognized by the courts, is accepted matters. The moment you say accepted matters, generally in many of the government contracts, for example, IOCL, you will see there is this range of matters wherein they already have a mechanism, which is an in-house mechanism. So when you say in-house mechanism, there is already somebody like superintendent engineer who will adjudicate the issue and his decision will be final. So if there is an accepted matter which is recognized in the arbitration agreement, that accepted matter cannot undergo through the route of arbitration. And if at all there is a party who refers such matters or such disputes to the arbitrator, and somehow arbitrator also adjudicates and passes an award, then that award is not enforceable. In fact, it can be challenged under section 34. And in one of the matters which I've already mentioned here, which is JG Engineer Private Limited versus Union of India 2011, in this matter, the court has recognized the doctrine of accepted matter and has set aside the award, saying that the party's autonomy has to be respected. So once the party has decided that these matters will fall in the category of accepted matter, it won't go into the arbitration. Now, there are also many cases, at times we also see that as far as arbitration is concerned, there are certain pre-qualification. Like in NHI matters, which I handle regularly, there is this pre-qualification that the party has to undergo through the conciliation process, or the matters has to refer to the DRB. Now, when you also have this pre-arbitration mechanism in place, please ensure that you follow this pre-arbitration mechanism, because it won't serve any purpose if you right away invoke arbitration, because the other party will say that these disputes are not arbitrable because of such and such reason. It is not as per the contract. They have not followed the prerequisite of arbitration, and hence it is necessary. Now, there is also one more thing I want to clarify, which is based on my personal experience, and that is many times these conciliation procedure are umpteen formality. It doesn't serve any purpose. In one of the matters which I am handling for one of the IT companies, in that matter, the parties are at complete loggerhead. There is no way there can be any conciliation. But then there is a provision in the agreement which says the MD of both the parties or the top officer of both the parties, they need to meet, sit together and try to reconcile. And the minimum period is 60 days. Meaning thereby that there is no way they can start this mechanism, arbitration mechanism, till the time this 60 days expires. And both the parties are very well aware that there is no way these disputes can be resolved mutually amicably. And one has to also see whether the moment you try to include this pre-arbitration mechanism, one has to see whether it really serve any purpose. Now there is another important topic which is non-signatory. As far as non-signatory is concerned, frankly, there is it's still a little gray area because there are a lot of conflicting judgments. So if we see section 21H, which clearly says that the party to an agreement can only undergo through an arbitration process. 21H is the relevant clause. Now, I've already mentioned one judgment in my slide which says Chloro Control India Private Limited versus Savern Trent Water Purification. I'll quickly read what really court has applied in this judgment, because this will give you a basic idea that what is the court approach when it comes to non-signatory. In this case, the court has recognized 2-3 principles. The first is group companies doctrine and then composite performance. As far as group company doctrine and composite performance is concerned, it has again been explained. I'll quickly read it. It says, not formally a signatory, but has assumed the obligation. So wherein if there is a non-signatory party and that party has assumed the obligation on behalf of the signatory party, then court might consider and allow the non-signatory party to be a part of the arbitration proceeding. Now there is another doctrine which is composite performance, wherein it says that if there is an agreement which is consequential and is in the nature of follow-up of the parent agreement or the mother agreement, and the way it is worded and the way the arrangement is, it is so intermingled that one can only perform its obligation under the consequential agreement only when you perform the obligation under the mother agreement. Then it can be a case of composite performance. And again, in this case also, a non-signatory party can be considered and can become a part of the arbitration process. Now there's a difference once this non-signatory party is agreeing to become a part of the arbitration process. Because if it is agreeing, then of course the onus or the proof is far much lesser. But if there is no consent, then it is only in exceptional cases the court allows such inclusion. Now I'll come to apart from this, there are other case laws which I have not mentioned in the slide, but I'll quickly read it. It's Reckitt-Benckiser versus Reinder. And this is a judgment of 1st July 2019. In this case, what happened is that there was an indemnification clause wherein the party agreed that, all right, on behalf of this particular party, which is a signatory party, I'll indemnify. However, despite of the indemnification, the court didn't allow the non-signatory party to be a part of the arbitral process. There is another judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court, State Bank of India versus Ericsson. In this case, the court has observed that no orders can be passed against a non-signatory party. Now I'll move to another topic, which is arbitrability. Now, as far as arbitrability is concerned, there is no provision in the Arbitration Act which says these disputes are arbitrable. However, there are many case laws which has defined that these disputes are arbitrable and these disputes are not arbitrable. And one of the landmark judgment is Booz Allen versus SBI, which is 2011 judgment. And there are 6 categories wherein the court has recognized that these disputes per se at the very outset are not arbitrable. First is disputes which arise out of criminal offenses, matrimonial disputes like divorce, separation, restitution, guardianship matters, insolvency and winding up matters, testamentary matters, eviction or tenancy matters governed by special statute. As far as eviction or tenancy matter governed by special statute is concerned, there are two kind of disputes under the tenancy. One is wherein you are questioning the tenancy itself, which will be governed by the provision of transfer of property F. If that is the case, those disputes are not arbitrable. However, if your dispute is only confined to the fact that you are claiming some amount, some India profit or some less lease amount, in that case, it might be arbitrable. As far as eviction of tenancy matters under TP are concerned, today it is pending before the larger bench of the Honorable Supreme Court. If you see the last matter which I have mentioned, which is Vidya Rolia versus Durga Trading. So this is today, as of now, this is pending before the larger bench, and I believe we will get more clarity as far as tenancy matters are concerned. And apart from this 6 matter, there is another category which is trust deed. This has been added by the Honorable Supreme Court in Vimal Kishore Shah matter in the year 2016. So the reason behind trust deed is concerned, the trust deed is a complete act in itself. And if we see the provision of trust deed, there is a specific clause which says that all issues under trust deed dealing with the beneficiary, trustee of the trust deed will be referred to principal civil bench. So therefore, the mechanism is provided. It's a complete act in itself, and therefore, if there is any issue under the trust deed, it won't be arbitrable. In the same lines, as far as Vimal Kishore is concerned, there is latest judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court. It is MGF Land Limited versus Aftab Singh. It is a very crucial judgment because in this judgment, the court has stated that if there is an arbitration clause in a buyer's agreement, that won't stop a consumer to approach consumer court. And it has followed the principle of Vimal Kishore only, which says that that's like Vimal Kishore, like trust deed, even the Consumer Protection Act is a complete act in itself. However, I would like to add, and that is purely my understanding, when it comes to a buyer's agreement, if we see MRNGF, which is a big builder, which has a lot of corpus, and if such big builders, such big companies are pitted against an individual, and these individuals are dragged into arbitration, wherein most of the time the seat of arbitration or the venue of arbitration is not as per the convenience of such an individual, then the parties are of course at the unequal bargaining part, and it doesn't really serve any purpose. So therefore, as far as MGF Land Limited case is concerned, apart from the fact that it has followed Vimal Kishore, I also feel that it has also followed the law of equity. Now I'll move to the next topic, and that is appointment of arbitrator. Now, appointment of arbitrator 21D is the relevant clause which defines the arbitral tribunal. Arbitral tribunal has to be an odd number. It can be 1, it can be 3, it can be 5. The idea is pretty clear that there should not be any clash. So if there is a judgment, it either should be 2:1, like majority is 2 and then dissenting is 1, or 3:2, the majority is 3 and the dissenting is 3. So that there is a majority judgment in case there is a dissent award. So that is the reason they always go for an odd number of arbitrators. It can also be just a sole arbitrator, which will be a single individual. Now, under Section 11 is the provision which will govern the appointment of arbitrator. And under Section 11, the arbitrator can be of any nationality, and parties are also free to agree on a procedure of appointment of arbitrator. And suppose there is any disagreement, be it the appointment of arbitrator or be it on the disagreement on the procedure, the party can approach the court under Section 11. Now, in this case, under Section 11, it has to be either High Court or Supreme Court. If it is a domestic award, if it's a domestic arbitration, it will be High Court, the concerned High Court. And if it is an international commercial arbitration, then it has to be Supreme Court. Now, international commercial arbitration is an arbitration wherein the seat of arbitration is India, but one of the party is a foreign party. Apart from this, there is also one important amendment in Section 11, and that is 11(6)(a). So if we see 11(6)(a) amendment, it says the court, if I approach the court for an appointment of an arbitrator, the court is only and only expected to see whether the arbitration agreement exists. Nothing more, nothing less. court won't go into other threshold issues like whether the disputes or the claim which has been raised by the parties they pertain to the arbitration, or even for that matter arbitrability of the issue. I'll read out from a judgment delivered by Justice Kurian Joseph. I believe I've already mentioned it here. Right, it's the third pointer if I see. It says whether validity of an arbitration agreement is to be examined apart from its existence. So one is that there is an arbitration clause, arbitration exists. Now, if a party approaches a court and says that please refer this dispute to an arbitrator, the court has to simply allow Section 11 and refer the dispute to an arbitrator. Now, if I'll discuss this judgment, Bureau Ferreira, it says the scope of the power under Section 11(6) was considerably wide in view of the decision of SBP and Company versus Patel Engineering. I'll just give you the background as far as Patel Engineering is concerned. It stated that the court is required to resolve certain threshold issues and not merely just refer all the claims under the Section 11 to arbitration. So there has to be certain exercise of power, certain threshold issues need to be decided. However, there is a departure from that position because as far as this amendment under Section 11(6) is concerned, it clearly says that only one has to see is the existence of the arbitration clause, not the validity of the arbitration clause. And the court has clearly said that this position continued till the amendment brought about in 2015. After the amendment, all that the court needs to see is whether an arbitration exists, nothing more, nothing less. So it seems that it's more of a mechanical exercise. However, there is recent judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court, and it is more in the form of obiter dicta, wherein Justice Rohinton has observed that at least certain issues need to be weed out. Suppose if there are certain claims which are not even arbitrable, at least those claims need to be weed out. If not, all the threshold issues need to be decided under Section 11. However, there is no clear judgment on that, and as far as the law stands today, 11(6)(a) is pretty clear. The only issue the court has to decide is the existence of arbitration agreement, and that is it. Now, this brings us to the next topic, and that is what if there is a name which is already mentioned in the agreement? That means named arbitration. Suppose there's an agreement wherein it says that this dispute will be resolved by such and such person. Or suppose it says that the company, the MD of the company will appoint an arbitrator who's going to adjudicate upon the dispute. Now, party autonomy, although it's much respected, because ultimately arbitration contract is a contract between the parties, and whatever parties have decided, it needs to be respected, it needs to be enforced, it needs to be recognized. But there are many times when the parties don't really enjoy equal bargain of power. And most of the time, even if they enjoy equal bargaining power, they are not really well versed with the arbitration process. They don't even foresee that, tomorrow this contract will run into rough weather and there'll be the disputes, and this dispute will be decided by an individual who's already pre-selected by the opposite party. So as far as Supreme Court is concerned, now the position is very clear. Perkins, Eastman Architects DPC versus HSCC. In this case, the court has simply said name arbitrators cannot be allowed to adjudicate upon the dispute. Primarily, of course, because their impartiality is highly questionable, and the arbitrator has to be somebody with neutral credibility. It has to be someone who's impartial, who's not biased. So once there's an arbitrator who is already selected by one of the parties, there is, if not actual bias, there's always a deemed bias. And like they say, justice should not only be done, it should seem to be done. So of course, this party arbitrator's credibility is of utmost importance. It is completely non-derogable, and therefore Perkins Eastman Architect judgment is actually welcome, and it's a great step which has been taken by the Supreme Court. Although it's too late and too little, because in one of my matters, there are certain NBFC matters, which is non-banking financial institutes. In these matters, I have seen repeatedly that there is already a named arbitrator. That named arbitrator keeps on passing an ex parte awards, because most of the times the opposite party are not even able to attend the arbitration. They are not even aware that the awards have been passed, and then there is this enforcement and you can't even challenge the award because the time period to challenge the award is already expired. So to my understanding and to my belief, this should have come to an end, and now it has, rightly so. Now, as far as qualification of award arbitrator is concerned, in 2015, there was an amendment, and fifth schedule and seventh schedule was added. This fifth schedule and seventh schedule, it says basically what it tries to cover is that the connection and the nexus between the arbitrator and the appointing party should not be there, and to ensure there is no partiality. And now there is, in 2019, there is another addition, which is 8th schedule. Now this 8th schedule provides certain qualifications and experience of arbitrators. However, I would like to clarify, as far as 8th schedule is concerned, it has not been notified as of now. And this 8th schedule, which was also highly criticized by the international arbitration institutions, but this is only and only applicable to domestic arbitration. I'll now move to the next slide. And that is interplay of venue, seat, and section 42. I'll just need to stop a video for a second and I'll quickly resume. Sorry, everyone. So now the next topic is interplay of venue, seat, and section 42. Now, interestingly, if we see the Arbitration Act, the way it is worded, the party has a choice to select the seat of arbitration. And there is another clause, there's another provision, which is section 42, which talks about the jurisdiction. Now, if we see provision 20, it says place of arbitration can be decided by the parties. And if they have not decided, then there is a power which has been conferred upon an arbitrator. Even he can decide a place of arbitration, provided both the parties they agree. And there is another clause, section 42. It says that it is more in the lines of section 20 of CPC, where it says if there are multiple cause of action and one of the parties approach under part 1 to one of such courts which has this bestowed jurisdiction in itself, then this very court will continue to be the court. So suppose there are 5 jurisdictions, there's multiple cause of action, and there are courts in Delhi, Mumbai, or UP. In all these 3 states, they have a jurisdiction because of multiple jurisdiction, and I decided to approach a court under section 9, a Delhi High Court. Then I'll be bound to Delhi High Court for rest of my proceedings. Now there are, again, if we see that there is a slight dichotomy when it comes to section 20, which is says place of arbitration, and when we see the jurisdiction clause, which is section 42. Now, as far as the provisions under Indus Mobile Distribution Private Limited, and there's another judgment, BGS, SGS, SOMA. These 2 judgments, they clarify that there is no conflict, there is no dichotomy, and I'll read out the relevant provisions of this judgment. As far as Indus Mobile is concerned, Indus Mobile recognize the principle of concurrent jurisdiction. So basically, 2 courts, one which enjoys this jurisdiction based on the seat of arbitration, and another court which enjoys the jurisdiction based on the subject matter of dispute, which is more in line of section 20 of CPC, which I've just covered. So it recognizes the principle of concurrent jurisdiction. Now, again, the moment there's a concurrent jurisdiction, there is a lot of territorial dispute. And again, there were plethora of judgments which were conflicting judgments, and few of the issues were answered, few of the issues were left unanswered. But to my belief, as far as BGS, SGS, SOMA is concerned, it completely answers the issue. I'll read out from this judgment. It says section 42 of the 1996 Act is meant to avoid conflicts in jurisdiction of courts by placing the supervisory jurisdiction over all arbitration proceeding. what is important is where a seat is designated in an agreement, the courts of the seat alone have jurisdiction. So suppose in an arbitration clause, there is already a seat which is mentioned, that court alone will have jurisdiction, and the party needs to approach only that court and no other court. And in case you approach the other court, of course, that petition won't be entertained. However, if there is no seat which is mentioned in the clause, in the arbitration clause or agreement, then the party can exercise its choice of place of jurisdiction based on the multiple jurisdiction. So the second part says where it is found on the fact of a particular case that either no seat is designated by agreement or the so-called seat is only a convenient venue, then there may be several courts where a part of the cause of action arises that may have jurisdiction. And therefore, like I already said, that in case there are multiple jurisdictions, then the party has a choice and it can approach one of the courts. But in case the seat of arbitration is already defined, then as per BGS SOMA judgment, only that court which supervises the seat of arbitration is the concerned court and no other court. Apart from this, I'll also shortly cover the judgment, which is a landmark judgment, 2012 Balco judgment. Balco judgment also recognized the concurrent jurisdiction. It says the part 1 and part 2. Part 1, like I've already covered, deals with domestic arbitration or ICA, and part 2 deals with foreign award. They both are separate parts and they are not applicable to each other. Just before that, the background is that the Supreme Court in Bhatia judgment has intermixed part 1 and part 2, saying that even the foreign party can move under part 1. However, that position has been clarified under Balco. Apart from this, what has been observed is that since part 1 is not applicable to foreign award, there are times when the party are in complete fix, especially when it comes to interim relief. So now there is this amendment where it says that as far as section 9 is concerned, which covers interim award, and if you want to take assistance of the court for recording of evidence, even in case of foreign award, then you can approach the Indian courts. So therefore, part 1 is selectively applicable only and only for interim measure and recording of evidence. Now, challenging the arbitral award. As far as challenging the arbitral award is concerned, at the outset, I would like to say that once there is an award which is against you, half the battle is already lost, because this has been my experience. That once there is an award which is against you, there is the chances to succeed in your challenge is next to almost zero. So 2(1)(c) is an defines arbitral award, which also includes an interim award. Interim award means suppose there's an ongoing arbitration, but then there are certain claims which, based on the pleadings of the party or maybe even admission, such claims can be decided that then the arbitral tribunal, instead to wait for the entire arbitral procedure to end, can pass an interim award. Section 31 defines the form and content of an arbitral award. Now 31, there are certain provisions which I would like to read out because these are really important. Apart from the fact that the award has to be in writing, it has to be signed by the arbitrators, and the date and place of the arbitration has to be mentioned. What is important is the delivery part, because that actually starts the time limit of most of the other provision and the rights which are available to the party. So it says that the award has to be delivered only and only upon the parties. And when I say party, it has to be the party to the arbitration agreement. So I, as an advocate, cannot collect the award on behalf of my client because I am not a party to the arbitration agreement. Now, once there is an arbitration award, there are certain reliefs, certain scope which is there within the parties. That is, once you go through the award and if you see there is any error, any typo error, then you can approach the tribunal, but within 30 days time. And you can say that such is a typographical error, so you please provide a clarification or you please provide the correction. Apart from this, there is also another clause which is 33(4), which allows the party to approach a tribunal again within 30 days time for passing of an additional award. So generally, you cannot ask the tribunal to allow the claim which has been disallowed. But suppose there is a claim wherein they have recognized the interest part, but in the finding, in the operative part of the award, that interest has not been awarded, but in the subject of the award, that interest has been recognized. So for such things, you can always approach the tribunal again within 13 days time. And the tribunal has to pass its award on the correction within 30 days time, and the award on the additional award within 60 days time. As far as tribunal is concerned, this time period is extendable. Now, like I said, that the delivery of the award to the concerned party is a very, very crucial issue, like because it sets in motion a lot of timelines. Now, there are judgments with that respect. I'll quickly go through these judgments. These judgments are already mentioned on the slide. The first is State of HP versus Himachal. It says the starting point of limitation is the date on which you deliver the award, and that has to be, and that delivery of the award is in congruence to the receipt of the award. Simplex Infrastructure versus Union of India. It emphasizes on the fact that once you have received the award, the timeline is 3 months plus 30 days. What is important is that after 3 months plus 30 days, even courts are powerless to condone the delay. So once there is an award which has been duly received by you under 31, as per the section of 31, and then you choose not to challenge this award in the given timeline, you cannot approach the court no matter what, because even the courts are powerless. So it's 3 months plus 30 days. In Union of India versus Teco Tricky, in this case, again, the court has a point on the part of receipt of the award. It says the delivery of the awarded arbitral award to the party has to be effected only on to be this receipt by the party. And the last judgment which I have mentioned is Krishna Committee versus Karam Yogi Shelter. The proposition I've just discussed, where it says the award has to be delivered to a party, not its agent, not its advocates. Now, recourse against the arbitral award. Like already said, if there is an arbitral award against you, half the battle is already lost, because the interference of court is really very narrow. So generally, these challenges are not sustainable. And if we see the language of 34(2)A and 34(2)B, it reflects the fact why these challenges are generally not sustainable, because the scope is very, very narrow. If we see 34(2)A, the arbitral award can only be set aside if the parties are under some incapacity, or the arbitration agreement is not valid, or no proper notice of an arbitration proceedings were provided, or the award decides a dispute which is beyond the reference, or you're not happy with the composition of the arbitral tribunal. That means that the composition of arbitral tribunal or the procedure adopted by the arbitral tribunal, they were not as per the agreed clause. Now, as far as 34(2)A is concerned, it's fairly simple. I don't think so it requires much elaboration. What really requires elaboration is 34(2)A, because that is a scope, that is the place wherein you can get your awards fixed if there is a possibility. 34(2)B, the award can be set aside if the court finds that A, subject matter of dispute was not capable of settlement by arbitration. This I've already covered. Like if there is a dispute which is not arbitrable, or if it's an accepted matter, and if it was already defined in the arbitration agreement that this set of disputes won't go through the route of arbitration, it will go through the route of maybe civil procedure before the civil court, then in that case the court will set aside the award. Now, if we see the next second point, which is conflict with the public policy of India. Now, there are plethora of judgments when we say public policy of India, because this is the only expression which leaves a little room. Rest everything is very well defined. There is no way one can say otherwise. But when it comes to public policy of India, there's still a little room. But then there are latest amendments, 2015 amendments especially, wherein even this public policy of India, the definition has been narrowed down. Now, public policy, it has actually been said that it is an unruly horse. But now what I feel is that is not the position anymore because of 2014 to 2015 amendment. If we read out these two explanations which have been inserted by this amendment, it will show that even this scope of public policy of India, it's only and only with respect to the fundamental policy of Indian law. I'll read out explanation 1 and 2. Explanation 1 says, an award is in conflict with the public policy of India only if 1. Induced or affected by fraud or corruption, or is in violation of section 75 and 81. So if it is fraud and corruption, it's easy to establish. Of course, there is not even any order which is sustainable if it has been obtained by any sort of corruption and fraud. So similar thing is applicable in arbitration as well. If we see section 75, it says section 75 and 81. Section 75 talks about the confidentiality, which means if there is a conciliation proceedings which happen and that has been referred to. And section 81 talks about the evidence which is an extraneous evidence. So suppose there is an evidence which is not a part of the present arbitration proceeding and has been relied upon by one of the parties and the award is based on those extraneous documents, then it will be set aside. Now, the second point is contravention with the fundamental policy of Indian law. Like I said, this public policy is no longer, it doesn't really enjoy the status it used to. This public policy conflict has to be aligned with the fundamental policy of India. There's a judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court, Renu Sagar, wherein it says that the contravention not of all the statutes will come within the ambit of fundamental policy of India. So suppose if there is a section, you say that this section has, this award is in contravention to this section. Even that won't fulfill the fundamental policy of Indian law. And then another pointer is conflict with the most basic notion of morality of justice. Explanation 2. And again, we see this definition has further been narrowed. Explanation 2 says, test as to whether there is a contravention with the fundamental policy of India shall not entail a review on the merits of the dispute. So even if there is a contravention of fundamental policy of India, then also court cannot reassess the effects or reassess the evidence. So court can't really go into the merits of the dispute. Apart from this, there is also another provision, section 34(2)(a). It has been inserted by 2015 amendment only. It talks about if there is a patent illegality in the award on the face of it. So the moment you say on the face of it, it has to be right at the outset. It should be right there. It should be brazen in the nature. If that is the case, the award will be set aside. Importantly, section 34(2)(a) is only applicable to domestic awards and not international commercial arbitration. And again, there is a proviso. So whenever there is a little room which is being provided, then there is a proviso and there is this explanation wherein they try to cut your arms. And the proviso says, shall not be set aside merely on the ground of an erroneous application of the law or by reappreciation of evidence. So just because there is this erroneous application of law, it's not, it won't satisfy the definition of patent illegality. It has to be far more brazen and the perversity should be on the face of it. Patel Engineering Limited, this is the latest judgment. This is 22nd May 2020. In this judgment, this proposition of patent illegality has been recognized, and based on this patent illegality, the award has been set aside. It says the ground of patent illegality is a ground available under the statute for setting aside a domestic award if the decision of the arbitrator is found to be perverse or so irrational that no reasonable person would have arrived at the same, or the construction of the contract is such that no fair or reasonable person would take, or that view of the arbitrator is not even a possible view. So it has to be completely irrational. It has to be absurd to a level that no reasonable person can come to such a conclusion. Then only it will satisfy the proposition of patent illegality. Now that brings us to the few of the case laws which I have tried to capture. And these case laws by way of these case laws, I'll just give you a flavor of the of section 34 interference, like what are the propositions which have been opined and majorly and vastly recognized by the courts. This I'll just skip because I have more or less already covered it. I'll come to this slide, which is courts interference. In PCL, Suncon and BSNL, the court has recognized that it doesn't sit in appeal review. And the reason is that one has to maintain the efficacy of the arbitration process. So basically, if you have decided that you want to arbitrate, then you won't litigate. Hence, the scope of interference has to be narrowed. It has to be curtailed. Error of facts or law. In this case, which is very, very important, this is Union of India versus Chenab Construction. I would like to read out a few lines from this case so that I can capture the exact essence. Now, it is very important to appreciate what this, in this case, what Supreme Court has really appointed. It says that the tribunal is the final arbiter on facts as well as in law. And even errors, factual or legal, which stops short of perversity, do not merit interference under section 34 or 37. So even if there is some error in law, some error in application of law, or some error in appreciation of facts, and most of us, like, we argue that our pleadings have not been recognized, so this has been overlooked or that has been overlooked, this is not a sufficient ground for challenge of the award. Second is plausible view. Now, this has been held in obtain number of judgments, wherein it says that there are two views which are possible, and one of the view has been taken by the tribunal. It is not challengeable just because there is an alternate view. This is judgment Pearl Developer versus Universal Land 2018 judgment. Now, the reason this judgment is important is because this judgment has distinguished between what is an unreasoned award and what is an intelligible award. It clearly says that the award without reasoning is not sustainable, because if we again go back to section 31(3), which I discussed, that there has to be reasoning in the award. So what you have arrived, your conclusion and the facts pleaded or the reasons provided by you, there has to be a certain nexus. Though reasons shouldn't be very satisfactory, that is one thing. That till the time that some reasons are being provided, it will come under the definition of a reason award. It won't come under the definition of unreasoned award. Till that time there's some sort of nexus, some sort of connection, you can make head and tail of it. Now, another judgment, Dyna Technologies Limited versus Crompton 2019 judgment. It again decides that what is a reason order. It says an order is reasoned when it is proper, intelligible, and adequate. Importantly, again in this case, the court has stated that inadequacy of a reason might not be a ground. Just because that reason provided is not adequate enough, till the time there's a reason provided, that might not be a ground for setting aside of the award. But importantly, in this case, the court has allowed in this case, the Supreme Court has allowed that the court can look into the documents. That when I say document, that means arbitral record. So suppose there is a reasoning which is being provided, but that reasoning is not adequate enough. But then there is an arbitral record which courts can refer to. So the court can substitute the reasoning based on those records and cannot simply set aside the award in a casual or cavalry manner. So there is a difference, like I said, between inadequate reasoning and unintelligible award, because the moment you say unintelligible award, it means there's no reasoning provided at all. And that brings us to the last slide. I believe I've already consumed much of the time, so I'll quickly try to wrap up. It talks about award, enforcement and stay. So as far as 2015 position is concerned, today, if the moment you file section 34, your award there's no automatic suspension or stay of the award. So apart from 34, you have to also file an application under for stay of the award. So unless you get a stay, the award is enforceable. And as far as stay is concerned, again, Section 36 states that the court has to give a reason as to why the court is providing a stay. Also, in order to secure the party which has an award in its favor, court can direct the other party, the judgment debtor, to deposit some sort of amount to secure the party. Interestingly, before 2015, if we see, the provision was that as soon as you file 34, that 34 is before the court, there's a stay in the award. But that was not the position which was there in Delhi before Delhi High Court, because before Delhi High Court, what was recognized is that till the time there is no notice in the petition. So if I file section 34, that doesn't mean there is a stay. So my 34 has to be admitted. There is a notice which has to be issued. Then only the award will be stayed. Now that position, like I've already discussed in 2015, it has been 2015 amendment has been clarified. There has to be a separate stay. In BCCI versus Kochi Cricket, now there is a Supreme Court judgment which says that this 2015 amendment is applicable to all the court proceedings, not only the court proceedings which emanates from the arbitral proceedings after 2015, even before 2015. This position was reversed in 2019 by in 2019 amendment. They inserted the section 87, and this section 87 says that as far as 2015 amendment is concerned, it is only applicable prospectively. Now again, today as of now we stand, there is another judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court, which is Hindustan Construction Company versus Union of India. Section 87 has been struck down. The original position which was opined by the Honorable Supreme Court in BCCI, it has been reinstated. And again, the concept of cutoff date has been washed away as far as court proceedings are concerned. That brings an end to our slides. Now, there were certain more issues which I wanted to discuss, but I believe there is a time restraint. So apart from what I've already covered in my slides, I'll just quickly discuss a couple of more provisions. As far as interim measure is concerned, one can approach court under Section 9. Under Section 9, the scope of approaching court is only when you want to preserve the subject matter of dispute. Now there is another section, Section 17. Once the arbitral tribunal is constituted, so you can approach the arbitral tribunal, and if there is Section 9 which is pending before the court, that has to be withdrawn. And today, as of now, after 2015 amendment, the power enjoyed by the arbitral tribunal is at par with the power enjoyed by the courts. Apart from this, there are 2015-2019 extensive amendments, which I'll actually advise all of you to go through them. 2019 amendments, as of today, only 11 provisions have been notified. There are total 16 provisions, only 11 provisions have been notified. One can go through it in order to appreciate the nitty-gritty of arbitration. That is all for now. I believe we can take up the question round because we have already reached the end and it's already 5 o'clock.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks a lot for giving your 10 pointers of a vast topic of arbitration. It was really helpful. So I would like to put up some questions asked by the viewers. The first one is by Zoya Mehta. She asked that what should be the pecuniary value of the dispute oblique suit to go to arbitration?
Right. So Zoya, there is no pecuniary value of a suit so that it can be referred to arbitration. However, if we see that arbitration itself requires a lot of money when it comes to arrangement of venue and fee. So before inserting that clause of arbitration, one has to also be mindful of the fact that the moment you invoke arbitration, there's a certain money which it involves. So as such, as far as arbitration is concerned, there is no pecuniary upper limit. But but there's one thing which I would like to clarify: there are certain disputes which are not arbitrable. So even if for them, if you include an arbitration clause, these disputes will remain unarbitrable.
Okay, yeah. In addition to this, she's also asked that what are the fees which the parties are supposed to pay to start the arbitration proceedings?
So
many commercial contracts do not have. Sorry.
Right. So if we see 2015 arbitration schedule 4, the fee is already prescribed.
She has added some. Okay, I hope it is clear now. So the other question is from Nitesh sir. He is asking that when there is a dispute between seat and venue, which
Mhm.
one will prevail?
Seat. So there are times that seat and venue are interchangeably used. Even the place is interchangeably used. So the intent of the party has to be seen. So the seat of arbitration is uncompromisable. And sometimes this value is only with regard to the convenience of a party, because a place of arbitration can be anywhere. It's based on my convenience that even if the seat of arbitration is here in Delhi, the place of arbitration where the party actually meets
Okay.
can be somewhere in Mumbai. So seat of arbitration.
Okay. Yeah, I think it is clear now. The other question is from Kriti Kokhar, and she asked that the scope. Can you explain, as a law student, what is the scope of international as well as domestic arbitration for law students for opting arbitration as a career? This is a vast one.
So what I feel is that you won't choose arbitration. Arbitration will automatically come to you, because today invariably in most of the contracts there is an arbitration clause. And if your area of practice is civil, even if it's civil, general civil litigation, then also you'll automatically will be handling these cases. And international commercial arbitration, there's no much difference. The only thing is that one of the parties is a foreign party. Everything else is same.
Correct. Correct. And the other question is again from Nitesh sir. This is a deep one. He asked that how to challenge the authority of chamber arbitrators appointed by financial institutions who do bunch arbitrations with them. They do not provide disclosure, not the clarification, and thus are clearly biased arbitrators.
So as far as that is concerned, if there is no disclosure, again you can move an application under section 16, stating that the disclosure is required. And under, if we see schedule 5, there is also an upper limit that you can handle beyond 3 arbitration for a single party. So I believe today there is this enough law in place to protect the individuals, and if there is any such non-disclosure, then it definitely contravenes the arbitration provisions.
No, Tanu,
Because
my specific question in this was that where to challenge their authority, to High Court or to in the district court? Where to challenge their authority before?
this will be the same court which will be a supervisory court.
Okay.
So whosoever is supervisory court, suppose if there is a dispute which is less than 2 crore,
I got
there
it.
will be
That's
a
the
concerned principal.
jurisdiction part. That's I got it.
Right, right.
The next question is from Daksha Sandhu. She asks that what does section 87 state and what is the meaning of plausible view?
As far as plausible view is concerned, the view which is acceptable. Suppose there are certain contractual disputes, and the arbitrator has already interpreted them in a certain way. So he's already taken a plausible view. It's a reasoned view.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Thanks a lot. Now over to Zoya Mehta, ma'am. So that she
Thank you,
can
everyone. Thank you
conclude
for
the-
your patience, and I'm sorry I exceeded the time limit.
Tanu, one more question. This is all about the arbitration's cost now. In my view, the basic purpose of the arbitration was to take this high-ended commercial contracts towards the arbitration so as to give them a speedy justice and to get their disputes redressal. But now I think with the 2 or 3 member arbitrators, now the concept has again becoming a more of cost increasing rather than of the cost effectiveness. So the most of the commercial contractors, not those who are in very high in the potential, now they are again going back with the same manner in litigating in the courts rather going to the arbitration. So can you say something on that? Because now it's becoming more of cost increasing.
I kind of concur with your view, Nitish, because this is even what I feel. That every time you invoke an arbitration, first one has to go through a series of litigation, because most of the times the party don't agree on a choice of arbitrator. So you have to move section 11, and then although right now there's a guideline that section 11 has to be decided in a certain time period, And after section 11, once the arbitrator is appointed, then you have to take care of the arbitrator fee, then the venue of arbitration. The moment you take all this into account, I personally feel it's better to litigate. So to my view, arbitration is no longer, it's not really cost effective. It is not really a speedy remedy. But then if we see 2015 and 19 amendments, in 2015, the timelines have been prescribed. And there's a salutary provision like section 29A, which says the pleading, they need to be completed within 1 year time. Now it's a different, this is a shift which says 6 months of completion of pleadings plus 1 year of passing of award. So now, of course, there are certain timelines, and after 2019, there is an entire shift from ad hoc to institutional arbitration. Again, in institutional arbitration, one can expect a certain kind of discipline, and as far as even when it comes to fee of arbitrator, we can expect that the fee of arbitrator will be governed by Schedule 4, rather than, you know, they deciding their own fee, which can be skyrocketing at times.
Right. So my purpose was same only, and I also think, you know, now it's more of like the commercial courts act is of much effective for these commercial disputes rather going into the arbitration, because they are also been more time bound manner rather than the arbitration.
Even I feel that it's losing its feet, but that's my personal opinion. I mean, that has been my experience.
Now the model of commercial courts act would increase.
That is true.
Yeah.
And it's, in fact, when you say commercial court, there's a separate court in all the district courts now, and judges are very well versed. So we don't really face those issues which we used to face.
Right.
So definitely commercial courts are something which are far more sought.
Thank you, Tanu. Thank you for this. Now over to you, Zoya.
Well, this was an evening.
Zoya, before you thank, I want to thank Mr. Anupam Srivastav, sir, who has remained us with on board today. Thank you, sir, with remaining on the board with us. Anupam Srivastav, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Oh, well, this was an evening well spent. I would like to thank the person who made this a wonderful session, Advocate Tanupriya Gupta. She shared some very good and pertinent insights regarding domestic arbitration based on her hands-on experience handling such cases. I, for one, have a lot of faith in the efficacy and effectiveness of ADR. I would also like to thank Advocate Nitesh Mehra, who has taken up this responsibility of bringing us such eminent speakers and organizing these insightful sessions. Let me also thank each and every one of the participants here who have joined us today. They have really enriched us with the discussions, with the questions that they have asked. I hope that in the spirit of sharing, we also share our learning further with these colleagues who were unable to attend. There were we are facing many tough times, and it's really bad for everyone here. Each of us are handling multiple roles and yet taking out time for enriching our knowledge through sessions like these. I think one can't be Atmanirbhar in isolation. And it is platforms like these that actually practically make us Atmanirbhar. And I think that Nitesh Mehra sir is doing a really wonderful job. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoya, for that.
For having me.
Very wonderful thanking note. I'm not the only one. It's not possible without the help and aid of all of you. You know, one single person cannot do anything.
Yes.
It's always a matter. Thank you so much with this. And with this, we conclude today's sessions. Once again, thanks a lot to Tanu for presenting us with this arbitration topic and with the PPT presentation that was more informative. Thank you so much, Tanu. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone.